My name is Eric, and this is the story of how I found out my wife wasn't the person I thought she was. It's not just a story about love or betrayal. It's a story about what happens when trust is shattered and revenge becomes your only option. You'll see how one decision changed everything, forever. I married Mary 2 years ago. I thought she was the love of my life. The way she smiled, the way she laughed, everything about her made me feel like I'd won the lottery. I was all in, heart and soul. But sometimes, even when you think you know someone, you're wrong. And when the truth finally comes out, it can destroy everything in its path. I want you to imagine this. You're sitting at your kitchen table, thinking about how lucky you are. You've built a life with someone who you believe loves you just as much as you love them. But what if, in the middle of all that happiness, you started to notice things, small things, that didn't add up? Would you question it? Would you push it aside? Or would you wait, like I did? I didn't know that my life was about to change forever. I didn't know that everything I thought I understood about Mary and about love was a lie. But I learned quickly. And when I did, I decided to do something about it. What you're about to hear is not a fairy tale. It's a lesson, a warning. And for some of you, it might just be a mirror. Let me tell you about Mary. From the moment I met her, she was everything I could have ever wanted in a partner. She was warm, funny, and had this way of making every moment feel like it mattered. I was hooked the first time she smiled at me. We met at a small cafe downtown, a place I'd only gone to because a friend had bailed on me for lunch. It felt like fate, you know? Like all those moments of life leading up to that one encounter were worth it. We hit it off immediately. We talked about everything that day. Our favorite books, our favorite foods, even the dreams we both secretly kept to ourselves. And as I sat across from her, I remember thinking, this is the one. This is the person I've been waiting for. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I planned everything down to the last detail. A romantic dinner at the same cafe where we met, the perfect ring, and a speech I'd been rehearsing for weeks. When I asked her to marry me, she said yes before I could even finish the question. That moment still plays in my head sometimes, even now. Her face lit up, and for that brief second, I felt like I had the world in my hands. The wedding was beautiful, small, and intimate, just the way we both wanted it. Standing there, exchanging vows, I promised her everything. My love, my loyalty, my life. And I meant it. Every single word. She looked into my eyes and promised me the same. Our first year of marriage felt like a dream. I'd come home from work, and she'd be waiting with a smile. We'd cook dinner together, talk about our day, and make plans for the future. We talked about traveling, about starting a family, about growing old together. And for a while, I really believed that's where we were headed. But life has a funny way of distracting you, doesn't it? You get caught up in the routine, in the little things. Work gets busy. You start taking the good moments for granted. Looking back now, I wonder if that's when things started to change. When I got too comfortable, when I stopped noticing the little things about her that I'd fallen in love with in the first place. Still, I had no reason to doubt her. She was my wife, my partner. I trusted her completely. Even when she started spending more time out with friends or coming home later than usual, I didn't think much of it. I figured we were just settling into the reality of marriage, the part they don't tell you about in the movies. She'd tell me she was meeting a coworker for drinks or helping a friend with a problem, and I'd believe her. Why wouldn't I? I had no reason not to. I kept telling myself everything was fine, that we were fine. And for a while, I believed it. Because sometimes, when you love someone that much, you'll do anything to protect the image you've built of them in your mind. You don't want to see the cracks forming. You don't want to believe that the foundation of everything you've built together might not be as strong as you thought. But looking back, there were signs. Little things I ignored because I didn't want to question the person I trusted most. Like how she'd always keep her phone close to her, even when we were at home. Or how she'd smile a little too long when a certain coworker's name came up in conversation. And then there was the way she started dressing up more, even for casual outings. She'd brush it off when I asked, saying, "It's just nice to feel good about yourself." And I'd nod and tell her she looked beautiful. Because she did. She always did. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself that everything was fine. But there's a difference between love and denial, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize which one I was living in. In those moments, I held on to the good memories. The way we laughed together. The way she'd reach for my hand without thinking. The way she'd call me her rock. I wanted to believe those moments still meant something. I wanted to believe she still meant them. It wasn't until much later that I realized those memories were the only thing holding me together. And as much as I wanted to cling to them, the truth had already started to unravel, whether I wanted to face it or not. Before we continue, we noticed that over 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to the channel. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. It happened one night after dinner. Mary was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, laughing softly to herself. I asked her what was so funny, but she just waved me off and said, "Oh, nothing. Just something from work." I didn't think much of it at the time, but that laugh, it wasn't the laugh she used to share with me. It felt different, distant, like it wasn't meant for me. That night, she went to bed earlier than usual, leaving her phone charging on the kitchen counter. Normally, she'd bring it with her, but this time she didn't. I stood there for a while, staring at it. I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, like even touching it would be a betrayal of trust. But something inside me couldn't let it go. Something told me I needed to know. I picked up the phone and unlocked it with her passcode, one I thought I knew everything about. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Text from her mom, her friends, even her boss. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Mike. It wasn't just the name that caught my attention. It was the way the messages were written, playful, intimate, filled with inside jokes I wasn't a part of. I read one message, then another, and another. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. There were pet names, plans to meet up, things I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of saying to another man. And then I saw the pictures. Selfies of her, dressed up in ways I hadn't seen in months. Smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in what felt like forever. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen, my mind racing with questions. Who was Mike? How long had this been going on? Did she even love me anymore? I wanted to wake her up, to demand answers right then and there. But something held me back. A voice in my head said, "Not yet. Not like this." The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. I sat at my desk at work, staring at my computer screen, but all I could see were those messages. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting it to be Mary, or worse, Mike. My heart raced with every notification. I felt like I was living someone else's life, like the world I'd known had been ripped away from me overnight. When I got home that evening, Mary was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she cooked dinner. She greeted me with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. For a moment, I almost believed her. I almost believed that everything was fine, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Every word she said felt like a lie. Every laugh felt like it wasn't meant for me anymore. That night, I waited until she fell asleep before I grabbed her phone again. I needed more answers. I needed to know the truth. This time, I checked her call log. There he was again, Mike. They'd talked just an hour before I got home. For 20 minutes. 20 minutes she could have spent with me, but instead, she was on the phone with him. I started going through her photos, her social media, every corner of her digital life that I could access. I found more pictures, more messages. Some were innocent enough, but others made it clear. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation. This was a full-blown affair. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her as she slept, wondering how she could lie to me so easily. Did she feel any guilt at all? Did she even care? Or was I just some safety net she kept around while she had her fun with someone else? The worst part was, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to process it, to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to believe there was still a way to fix this, to make her see how much she was hurting me. But another part of me, one I wasn't ready to admit existed, wanted something else, something I wasn't proud of. Revenge. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to everything she did. I watched how often she checked her phone, how she smiled at messages I couldn't see, how she suddenly had more work meetings in the evenings. Each time, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. One night, she said she was going out with friends. She kissed me goodbye and told me not to wait up. As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she walked into a restaurant. 5 minutes later, he showed up. Mike. I knew it was him the moment I saw them together. The way she looked at him, it was like looking at a stranger. I didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him, laughing and holding his hand. That wasn't the Mary the first knew. That wasn't my wife. I sat in my car for what felt like hours watching them. My mind was racing with questions, with emotions I couldn't control. I wanted to burst in there, to drag her out and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. I needed to think. I needed a plan. When she came home later that night, I pretended to be asleep. She climbed into bed, kissed me on the forehead, and whispered, "I love you." But her words felt hollow. They didn't mean anything anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I knew. That was the moment I realized there was no going back. The person I thought I knew was gone. And the only thing left to do was make her feel the way she'd made me feel. Broken, betrayed, and alone. Those 3 words repeated in my mind like a mantra for days. I walked through my life like a ghost, pretending everything was fine, pretending I didn't know that my wife, the woman I had vowed to love and protect, was sharing her heart and body with someone else. But inside, I was a storm. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even confront her. Not yet. I was too focused, too determined. This wasn't going to end with me being the victim. If she thought she could betray me and get away with it, she was wrong. Dead wrong. I started small, almost as if I were testing the waters. While she was in the shower, I went through her phone again, taking screenshots of her messages with Mike, saving photos to a hidden folder on my own phone. I copied down his number, his address, everything I could find. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I needed it. Every detail felt like a piece of ammunition, a tool for whatever was coming next. Then I started tracking her movements. I downloaded an app onto her phone that synced her location to mine. She had no idea. Every time she told me she was going out with friends, I'd check the app and see exactly where she was. And every time, it was the same place, a little motel on the edge of town. My stomach churned every time I saw it. I could picture them there, together, laughing at me, mocking me behind my back. The thought of it made my blood boil. One night, I followed her again. This time, I parked close enough to see them walk into the motel together. They didn't even try to hide it. She held his hand, smiled up at him like he was her whole world. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might break. That was the moment I decided I couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. Something had to be done, and I was going to be the one to do it. The next morning, I started putting my plan together. It wasn't enough to just confront her, to throw her lies in her face. No, that would be too easy. She needed to feel what I felt. She needed to lose everything she thought she could hold on to while betraying me. And so did he. I spent hours going through her phone records, piecing together their conversations, their plans. I printed screenshots of their texts, every incriminating message, every picture. I created a folder, one for her, one for him. I wanted them both to know that I had the power to destroy them, to expose them to the world. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I called a private investigator. I told him I needed proof, real proof, something that couldn't be denied or dismissed. Within a week, he handed me photos, Mary and Mike kissing in a parking lot, holding hands at a coffee shop, walking into the motel together. Looking at those pictures was like pouring salt on an open wound, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see it. I needed to feel it. It fueled me, pushed me closer to what I knew had to be done. By the time I had everything I needed, I felt like a different person. I wasn't the same man who had proposed to Mary in that little cafe. I wasn't the same man who had promised to love her for better or worse. That man was gone. In his place was someone I didn't entirely recognize, someone who didn't care about the consequences, who only cared about making them pay. I started planting seeds. When Mary came home from one of her work meetings, I casually mentioned that I'd run into an old friend who worked at the same company as her. Her eyes widened for just a moment, just long enough for me to see the panic flash across her face. She quickly recovered, laughing it off, but I knew she was nervous. That was the first crack in her armor. Then I sent Mike a message from a burner phone. Pretending to be Mary, I told him we'd be out of town for the weekend and that he should come over to our house instead of the motel. He replied almost immediately, thrilled at the idea of being in my house, of defiling the space we had built together. That was all the confirmation I needed. The night before the weekend, I had set everything in motion. I could barely sleep. I lay in bed next to Mary, listening to her breathe, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. Part of me hoped she didn't. Part of me wanted her to wake up that morning thinking everything was normal, thinking she could keep living her double life. Because the moment she realized the truth, the moment everything unraveled for her, I wanted to see it. I wanted to see her face when she knew she'd lost everything. That morning, I kissed her goodbye like I always did, told her I had errands to run, and left the house. But I didn't go far. I parked down the street, out of sight, and waited. Hours passed. I kept checking my phone, watching her location, waiting for the notification that Mike had arrived. When it finally came, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a cold, calculating satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. I watched from the car as Mike pulled into the driveway, as Mary greeted him at the door like she hadn't a care in the world. They laughed. They kissed. They disappeared inside. And that's when I made my move. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and walked up to the house. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm, because I knew exactly what I was about to do. I walked up to the front door, my footsteps steady and deliberate. With every step, I felt the weight of weeks, months, of betrayal, humiliation, and anger. But I didn't feel nervous. Not anymore. I wasn't second-guessing myself. There was no room for doubt. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. When I opened the door, I didn't slam it, didn't make a scene. At least, not yet. I stepped inside and stood there for a moment, listening. I could hear their voices coming from the living room, low and intimate. I heard Mary laugh, that same laugh she used to share with me. It was like a knife to the gut. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened my resolve. I tightened my grip on the folder in my hand and walked toward them. They didn't notice me at first. Mike had his back to me, leaning close to Mary on the couch, his arm draped casually over her shoulders like he belonged there. Mary was smiling up at him, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing just a few feet away. I cleared my throat, loud enough to make them both freeze. Mike turned around first, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something bordering on fear. Mary's face was a perfect mask of panic. She tried to say something, probably an excuse, a lie, anything to explain what I was seeing, but I didn't give her the chance. I tossed the folder onto the coffee table, the photos and screenshots spilling out like a bomb that had just detonated. "Go ahead," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Take a good look." Mike reached for the photos first, his hand trembling as he flipped through them. I could see the color drain from his face as he realized just how much I knew. Mary, on the other hand, didn't move. She just sat there, staring at me, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't believe this was happening. For a moment, I thought she might actually try to deny it, but then her shoulders slumped and she looked away. She knew there was no point. "How long?" I asked, my eyes locked on hers. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at Mike, then back at me, as if hoping he might jump in and save her. When it became clear he wasn't going to, she finally muttered, "A few months." "A few months," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right, because that makes it better." Mike started to speak, something about how he didn't mean for this to happen, how it wasn't his fault, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said, pointing a finger at him. "Don't you dare try to play the victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing." Both of you did. For a moment, the room was silent. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. And then I smiled, a cold, humorless smile that I knew sent a chill down both of their spines. You know, I said, taking a step closer to Mike, I could have handled this differently. I could have gone to your wife instead of coming here. His eyes widened at that. You wouldn't, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Wouldn't I? I replied, tilting my head. You think you can come into my house, sleep with my wife, and walk away without any consequences? I could see him starting to panic, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what I was going to do next. But before he could say anything else, I grabbed the folder and threw it at him, the photos scattering across the floor. Pick them up, I said, my voice sharp. Every single one of them. And when you're done, get out of my house. He didn't move at first. He just stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But when I stepped closer, he scrambled to his knees and started gathering the photos, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold on to them. Mary was still sitting on the couch, watching in stunned silence. I turned to her, my anger boiling over. And you? I said, my voice filled with all the hurt and betrayal I'd been holding back. You don't get to play the victim either. You don't get to sit there and act like you're sorry. You knew what you were doing every step of the way. You chose this. Eric, please, she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said. Don't you dare try to make this about anything other than what it is. You betrayed me. You lied to me. And now, you get to live with the consequences. When Mike finished picking up the photos, I pointed to the door. Leave, I said, and don't come back. He hesitated, looking at Mary like he wasn't sure what to do. But one look at me was enough to send him scrambling out the door. I slammed it shut behind him, the sound echoing through the house like a final punctuation mark. For a moment, Mary and I just stood there, the silence between us heavier than anything I'd ever felt before. She started to speak again, but I cut her off. No, I said, you don't get to talk. Not now. Not after everything. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and started packing her things. She followed me, begging me to stop, promising me it was over, that she'd never see him again. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. I was done. When I finished, I handed her the suitcase and opened the door. Get out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Go to him. Go to whoever you want. But don't come back here. She left that night, her suitcase in hand, tears streaming down her face. And as I watched her walk away, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I felt free. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight that had been crushing me was gone. But freedom has its price. The house was eerily quiet after she left. Every sound echoed like a reminder of what had been lost. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door she'd walked out of, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me thought I'd feel triumphant, like I'd won some kind of battle, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. The sheets on her side were still neatly tucked, untouched from the night before. I sat there for a while, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my life was going to look like now. How do you move forward when the person you built your entire future around is gone? When the foundation of everything you believed in has crumbled beneath you? I tried to focus on practical things. I changed the locks on the doors, packed up the rest of her things, and left them on the porch. I deleted her contact information from my phone, blocked her number, and even removed her from social media. I wanted to erase every trace of her from my life. But no matter how many reminders I got rid of, she was still there. In the memories, in the empty spaces she used to fill, in the life we'd built together. A few days later, I got a call from Mike's wife. I debated whether or not to reach out to her, but I didn't have to. She had already found out. She thanked me for the evidence I'd left at her office, something I'd done in a fit of anger the day after everything went down. She said she confronted Mike, and he'd admitted to everything. She told me she was filing for divorce, that she didn't see any other option. I told her I understood. It felt strange, talking to her. We were two strangers who had been dragged into the same mess, two lives upended by the same betrayal. There was an odd sense of solidarity in that, a shared understanding of the pain we'd both been through. But even as we talked, I couldn't help but feel like I was reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. I tried to throw myself into work, into hobbies, into anything that would keep my mind occupied. But everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her. The mug she used for her morning coffee, the sweater she'd left draped over the back of a chair. Even the smell of her perfume lingered, haunting me like a ghost. I thought getting rid of her would bring me peace, but it didn't. It just left a void. One night, I went out to a bar, something I hadn't done in years. I wasn't looking for anything, wasn't trying to meet anyone. I just needed to be around people, to feel like I wasn't completely alone in the world. I sat at the counter nursing a drink, listening to the hum of conversations around me. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. Like maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. But then, out of nowhere, she walked in. Mary. She didn't see me at first. She was with friends laughing, her head thrown back like she didn't have a care in the world. It was like looking at a stranger. The woman who had torn my life apart was standing just a few feet away, acting like nothing had happened. And in that moment, all the anger, all the hurt, came rushing back. I thought about confronting her, about marching over there and demanding to know how she could be so carefree after everything she'd done. But instead, I stood up, left some cash on the counter, and walked out. She didn't see me, and I was glad, because for the first time, I realized I didn't want her to. I didn't want her to have any power over me anymore. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, things started to change. The pain didn't go away, not completely, but it became easier to bear. I started going for runs in the mornings, something I used to do before everything fell apart. I reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during my marriage. I even started therapy, something I never thought I'd do, but it helped. It gave me a place to process everything, to unpack the anger and the sadness and the guilt that I didn't even realize I was carrying. And then, one day, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about her in hours, maybe even a whole day. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I felt like I was starting to reclaim my life, piece by piece. Looking back now, I can see how easy it is to lose yourself in a relationship, to give so much of yourself to someone else that you forget who you are without them. I gave Mary everything, my trust, my love, my future, and she threw it away. But she didn't take everything. She didn't take me. I don't know what she's doing now, and I don't care. I don't care if she's with Mike or if she's alone, or if she's moved on to someone else, because I've moved on too. It's not easy. It's not perfect, but it's mine, my life, my choices. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. If you've ever been betrayed like I was, if you've ever felt like your world has been ripped apart, I want you to know that you can get through it. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, but you can survive. You can rebuild. And someday, you might even find yourself looking back and realizing that losing them was the best thing that ever happened to you. It took me a long time to get there, but I did. At first, I couldn't see it. All I could see was the pain, the betrayal, the anger that consumed me every time I thought about Mary and what she'd done. I felt like my life had been stolen from me, like everything I'd worked for, everything I'd believed in, was gone. But with time, and trust me, it took a lot of time, I started to realize something important. Losing her wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something new. I began to look at myself differently. I started asking questions I hadn't asked in years. What do I want? Who do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? For so long, my identity had been tied to being Mary's husband, to being the man who supported her, loved her, stood by her no matter what. But when that was stripped away, I was left with the most important question of all. Who am I without her? The answers didn't come all at once. They came in small moments, in quiet realizations. Like the first time I laughed again, really laughed, at a stupid joke one of my friends made. Or the first time I went out for a run and felt the sun on my face, the wind in my hair, and realized I wasn't thinking about her at all. Or the first time I looked in the mirror and didn't see a broken man staring back at me. I saw someone stronger, someone who had been through hell and survived it. I won't lie to you and say it's been easy. Healing never is. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when the memories would creep back in and I'd wonder if I could have done something differently. If I'd missed the signs, if I'd been too blind, too trusting. But I learned to let go of those thoughts. Because the truth is, what she did wasn't about me. It was about her. Her choices, her flaws, her inability to value what we had. And that's not on me. That's on her. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's not about saying what they did was okay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they did. I'm not saying I've forgiven Mary. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I've forgiven myself. For trusting her. For loving her. For being human. And that, more than anything, has helped me move forward. Now, I focus on the future. I focus on the things that bring me joy, the people who truly care about me, the goals I want to achieve. I've started traveling, something Mary and I always talked about but never actually did. I've reconnected with old friends, built new relationships, and even started dating again. And while I'm not rushing into anything, I've found that the idea of love doesn't scare me anymore. Because love isn't what hurt me. Betrayal did. And I won't let that betrayal define how I see the world. I still think about Mary sometimes. Not often, and not in the way I used to. When I do, it's not with anger or sadness. It's with a quiet acceptance. She was a chapter in my life. A chapter that taught me some of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn. But she's not the whole story. She never was. And now, I get to decide what the next chapter looks like. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that pain is inevitable, but so is growth. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it shape you into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows their worth and refuses to settle for anything less. And that's the choice I've made. I've chosen to live, to heal, to move forward. And if you're going through something like this, if you've been hurt, betrayed, left wondering how you'll ever get through it, I want you to know that you're not alone. You're stronger than you think. And someday, you'll look back and realize that the pain didn't break you. It built you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it helped you in any way, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories like this. Because life isn't always easy, but it's always worth telling. This is Wild Love Story, and I'll see you in the next one.